11:47 p.m., November 3rd, 2020. Jack Ma's phone rings. The voice on the other end is calm, professional, final. The IPO is suspended, effective immediately. In 28 offices across Shanghai and Hong Kong, investment bankers stare at computer screens going dark. Presentation decks vanish. Spreadsheets close. Email alerts flood in. $37 billion, the largest initial public offering in human history, vanishes in 37 hours. 48 hours earlier, Jack Ma stood on a stage in Shanghai and criticized the most powerful financial regulators in China. What he said in those 20 minutes would cost him $246 billion. This is the story of one speech that destroyed a $250 billion dream. The story of how China's richest man learned that in China, no one is too big to fail. To understand what died that night, you need to understand who built it. 1999, Hangzhou, China. An English teacher named Jack Ma gathers 17 friends in his apartment. He tells them he's going to build something that will change China. They believe him, barely. Ma wasn't an obvious candidate for success. He'd been rejected by Harvard, rejected by KFC, 24 applicants, 23 got hired. He even applied to be a police officer, too short, too scrawny. When he first saw the internet in 1995 on a trip to the United States, he searched for beer and found results from Germany, Japan, the US, nothing from China. He searched for China and found almost nothing. So he decided to put China online. Alibaba launched in April 1999. The pitch was simple: connect Chinese manufacturers with global buyers. It was eBay meets Amazon meets the Yellow Pages, built for a country that barely had internet access. By 2003, Alibaba was profitable. By 2007, it was dominant. By 2014, it was ready for the world. September 19, 2014, the New York Stock Exchange. Alibaba's IPO raises $25 billion, the largest in history. Jack Ma becomes a global icon. China's richest man, the face of Chinese entrepreneurship. At the opening bell, he's wearing a Tai Chi outfit, grinning like he's just pulled off the greatest magic trick in history. Because he had. But Ma wasn't done. While building Alibaba, he'd created something else, something that would become even bigger. In 2004, Alibaba had a problem. Chinese consumers didn't trust online shopping. They wouldn't pay until they received the product. Sellers wouldn't ship until they got paid. Stalemate. Ma's solution, Alipay, an escrow service. Buyers send money to Alipay. Sellers ship the product. Once the buyer confirms receipt, Alipay releases the funds. Simple, brilliant, revolutionary. By 2020, Alipay had evolved into something far beyond payments. It had become Ant Group, a financial services empire with 3 pillars. First, payments. By 2020, Alipay had 1 billion users, 80 million merchants. It processed $17 trillion in transactions annually. Walk into any restaurant in Shanghai, any street vendor in Chengdu, any luxury store in Beijing, there's a QR code. Scan it, pay instantly. No cash, no credit card, just your phone. China had leapfrogged the Western world. While Americans were still swiping plastic, Chinese citizens were living in a cashless society. 65% of all transactions in China were mobile payments. In the United States, 6%. Second, lending. Huabei and Jibei, Ant's consumer credit products. 3-minute application, instant approval, no collateral required, just data. Your Alipay transaction history, your shopping patterns, your payment behavior. The algorithm knew whether you'd repay before you did. By 2020, 400 million people had borrowed from Ant Group. 400 million. Think about that number. That's more than the entire population of the United States. Third, wealth management, Yuebao, a money market fund that paid higher interest than traditional banks. By 2020, it held $168 billion in assets, the largest money market fund in the world. Ant Group wasn't just big, it was bigger than the financial system it was disrupting. It processed more payments in China than Visa and MasterCard combined. It was valued at $310 billion, more than Goldman Sachs, more than Morgan Stanley, more than any financial institution in America except JP Morgan Chase. And in October 2020, Jack Ma announced Ant Group would go public. The target raised $37 billion through a dual listing on the Shanghai and Hong Kong stock exchanges. It would shatter every IPO record in history, including Alibaba's. Investor demand was insane. $3 trillion, 70 times oversubscribed, everyone wanted in. American pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, Wall Street banks, and millions of Chinese retail investors who saw this as their chance to ride Jack Ma's magic carpet one more time. Chen Wei, we're changing his name, was one of them. 34 years old, an accountant in Shanghai. He'd saved $50,000, his entire life savings. He was putting it all into the Ant-IPO. This is my retirement, he told friends. Jack Ma changed China, he'll change my life too. November 5th, 2020 was circled on every calendar, the day Ant Group would go public. The day Jack Ma would cement his legacy as the greatest entrepreneur in Chinese history. It was a day that would never come. To understand why Ant Group died, you need to understand what it had killed. 2015, a street market in Beijing. An old woman is selling dumplings from a cart. She's been here for 40 years. Cash only, always cash. But now taped to her cart is a printed QR code, Alipay. This is the revolution. For decades, China's financial system was a fortress. State-owned banks dominated. They lent to state-owned enterprises. If you were a small business owner, a rural farmer, a young entrepreneur, forget it. No collateral meant no loan. No connections meant no account. Hundreds of millions of Chinese citizens were locked out of the financial system. Ant Group changed that, not by asking permission, by making permission irrelevant. The QR code revolution was elegant. No credit card needed, no bank account required, just a smartphone and an internet connection. Suddenly, the dumpling vendor could accept digital payments. The taxi driver, the fruit seller, the street musician. By 2020, Alipay had 55% of China's mobile payment market. Not a monopoly by law, but functionally, it was the infrastructure of Chinese commerce. The lending transformation was even more profound. Liu Xiaoming, another name we're changing, was 28 years old. He owned a small restaurant in Chengdu. In 2018, he needed $10,000 to buy new kitchen equipment. His restaurant was doing well, but traditional banks wouldn't touch him. They wanted 6 weeks of paperwork. They wanted collateral he didn't have. They'd probably reject him anyway. So he opened Huabei, Ant Group's consumer lending app. 3 minutes. That's how long it took. The app analyzed his Alipay transaction history, his shopping patterns, his bill payments, his social connections. The algorithm saw 2 years of reliable behavior. It saw a small business owner who paid his rent on time, who kept his promises, who was a safe bet. Approved, $10,000, deposited instantly. I couldn't believe it, Liu said. The bank said no in 6 weeks. Ant said yes in 3 minutes. His restaurant survived. He's one of 500 million borrowers, 500 million people who got credit they could never get before. This was Ant Group's pitch to the world. We democratized finance. We gave loans to the unbankable. We brought the future to a country stuck in the past. Wall Street loved it. Revenue growing 40% annually, profit margins over 30%, double what traditional banks earned. The IPO pitch wrote itself: disruption, growth, dominance. But regulators in Beijing were reading a different story. Ant Group's lending model worked like this. Ant originated the loans. It ran the credit checks. It approved the borrowers. But it only kept 2% of each loan on its balance sheet. The other 98% sold to partner banks. Small regional banks that didn't have Ant's technology or Ant's reach. If borrowers defaulted, the banks absorbed the losses. Ant collected the origination fees. Socialized losses, privatized profits. By 2020, Ant had $370 billion in outstanding loans. If traditional banks needed to hold 8 to 10% in capital reserves, Ant only needed 2. The math was brutal. Ant could lend $50 for every dollar it held. Banks could lend $10. The leverage was massive. The profits were enormous. And the risk was somewhere else. Regulators watching this saw something familiar. They saw American banks in 2007. They saw subprime mortgages bundled and sold. They saw leverage and complexity and a system that looked brilliant, until it didn't. But in October 2020, none of this mattered to investors. The IPO was days away, the greatest financial offering in history. Nothing could stop it. Except Jack Ma was about to open his mouth. 2012. Xi Jinping becomes president of China. He has a vision: make China great again, but on the Communist Party's terms. The phrase is socialism with Chinese characteristics. The translation is simpler. Wealth is fine. Power belongs to the party. For 8 years, this worked. Tech companies boomed. Alibaba, Tencent, Didi, they grew into giants worth $2 trillion combined. Jack Ma became a billionaire, then the richest man in China, then a global celebrity. But by 2020, something had shifted. These companies weren't just big, they were powerful. They controlled data on more than 1 billion Chinese citizens. They controlled payment systems, communication networks, transportation. They were building parallel infrastructure to the state. In 2018, Jack Ma met privately with Xi Jinping at a Communist Party event. According to sources close to the meeting, Ma offered advice: Mr. President, lead on policy. Let companies lead on innovation. Xi's philosophy was different. The party leads on everything. 2 visions for China's future. Only one could win. By 2020, the warning signs were everywhere. Antitrust investigations were quietly beginning. Alibaba was being pressured to voluntarily donate billions to social causes. New draft regulations suggested fintech companies should be regulated like banks. But Ant Group wasn't changing course. Revenue was soaring. The IPO was days away. Behind the scenes, regulators were reviewing Ant's lending data. What they found alarmed them. Many borrowers had multiple loans across different platforms. Ant, Tencent's WeChat Pay, peer-to-peer lending sites. Each lender saw only their piece of the puzzle. No one saw the total debt load. Hidden debt accumulation, the kind that triggers financial crises. Default rates were officially reported at 1.5%. Regulators suspected the real number was higher, maybe 2, maybe 3%. At $370 billion in outstanding loans, even a 2% default rate meant $7.4 billion in potential losses. Could regional banks absorb that? What if there was an economic shock? What if unemployment rose? They were also discovering something else. Ant's credit scoring system, Zima Credit, analyzed over 1 billion users. But citizens didn't know what data was collected or how their scores were calculated. Your score could determine whether you got a loan, rented an apartment, even matched on a dating app. A private company controlled the financial identity of China's population. If Ant's servers were hacked, if the data was sold, if it fell into the wrong hands, the implications were catastrophic. October 23rd of 2020, regulators finalized their concerns. They had the evidence, they had the authority, they just needed the excuse. October 24th, 2020, Jack Ma gave it to them. But first, he was warned. September 2020, 6 weeks before the speech, an internal Ant Group legal memo later leaked to the press. Regulatory environment shifting. Recommends CEO avoid inflammatory public statements. October 15th, 2020, 9 days before the speech, a senior Alibaba executive privately warned Ma, the government is sensitive right now. Maybe skip the Bund Summit. Jack Ma's response, according to associates, they need us more than we need them. His closest advisors knew the risks. The regulators had sent signals. The warning signs were everywhere. It was the last time Jack Ma would be wrong about China. October 24th, 2020, Shanghai's Bund Finance Summit, China's version of Davos. The venue is spectacular. Crystal chandeliers hang from 30-foot ceilings. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlook the Huangpu River and the glittering Bund skyline, the iconic waterfront that symbolizes Shanghai's transformation from colonial outpost to global financial center. 800 people fill the ballroom, central bank officials, banking regulators, finance ministry leaders. These are the people who control China's $40 trillion financial system. Jack Ma walks to the podium wearing his signature black polo shirt. No tie, no suit. In a room of men in dark suits and stiff collars, this is already a statement. What he says in the next 20 minutes will cost him $150 billion. Ma's thesis is direct. China's banking system is broken, outdated, risk-averse, holding back China's economy. Today's financial system is the legacy of the industrial age, Ma says. It's a pawnshop mentality. He's talking about state-owned banks, the institutions that dominate Chinese finance, the ones that rejected entrepreneurs like Liu Xiaoming, the ones sitting in this room. He goes further. He attacks the Basel Accords, the international banking regulations that require banks to hold capital reserves against potential losses. The Basel Accords are like an old people's club, Ma says. They're focused on yesterday's risks. His argument, these regulations stifle innovation. They prevent lending to small businesses. They're designed for banks that take deposits and make loans, not for technology companies that use data and algorithms. The implication is clear. Ant shouldn't be regulated like a bank because Ant isn't a bank. Good innovation isn't afraid of regulation, Ma continues. But regulation shouldn't use yesterday's methods to manage tomorrow's businesses. The tone is dismissive, arrogant, challenging. The subtext is even clearer. You old bureaucrats don't understand what we're building. Your rules don't apply to us. The applause is polite. The smiles are frozen. In the audience sits Yi Gang, the governor of the People's Bank of China. Next to him is Guo Shuqing, chairman of the China Banking and Insurance Regulatory Commission. These two men control Jack Ma's fate. He just publicly insulted them. One regulator would later tell reporters, on condition of anonymity, he acted like the rules didn't apply to him, like he was bigger than the system. We had to show him otherwise. Western media coverage the next day is glowing. Jack Ma challenges China's financial establishment. Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal. Financial Times, they see a disruptor taking on the old guard. Investors are bullish. The disruption narrative is confirmed. The IPO is 12 days away. Nothing can stop it now. In Beijing, regulators have a different reaction. They're furious. 9 days until everything collapses. November 2nd, 2020, 72 hours before the IPO. Jack Ma, Ant Group CEO Eric Jing, and Chairman Simon Hu receive a summons, emergency meeting, mandatory attendance. The location, a joint meeting of 4 regulatory bodies, the People's Bank of China, the China Banking and Insurance Regulatory Commission, the China Securities Regulatory Commission, the State Administration of Foreign Exchange. This is unprecedented. All 4 top financial regulators in one room. The message is direct. Your business model violates multiple regulations. They cite specifics. Insufficient capital reserves for your loan portfolio. Anti-competitive practices in payments. You're forcing merchants into exclusive agreements. Improper consumer lending practices. Hidden fees. Predatory targeting of young borrowers. Data privacy violations. Your credit scoring is opaque and unaccountable. The ultimatum. Restructure your company. Become a financial holding company subject to the same regulations as banks, starting now. According to leaked accounts of the meeting, Jack Ma's initial response is defiance. Then silence. The meeting ends. There's no agreement. No compromise. 37 hours until the IPO. November 3rd, 2020, 11 p.m., Shanghai time. The Shanghai Stock Exchange releases a statement. Due to major changes in the regulatory environment, the listing of Ant Group on the Science and Technology Innovation Board is suspended. 37 hours before trading was set to begin. Minutes later, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange releases an identical statement. The timing is deliberate. After markets close, before investors can react, before the news can spread, the world wakes up to the announcement. Chen Wei, the Shanghai accountant who saved $50,000, sees the news at midnight. He's been refreshing the Ant Group IPO page every hour for 3 days. Suddenly, there's a red banner across the top. Listing suspended. He refreshes the page. It's still there. He refreshes again and again. I thought it was a mistake, he would later say. I kept thinking they'd fix it. They didn't. His $50,000 is still in his bank account, but his dream is gone. In 28 offices across Shanghai and Hong Kong, investment bankers are staring at screens in disbelief. Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Citigroup, China International Capital Corporation. They've worked on this deal for 18 months. The fees, $400 million collectively, just evaporated. At Ant Group headquarters in Hangzhou, employees who arrived early for the final pre-IPO preparations stand frozen. Stock options granted months earlier, options that would have made many of them millionaires, are now worthless. One employee, speaking anonymously, would later tell reporters, "We worked 80-hour weeks for a year. We sacrificed everything, and it was all for nothing." David Chen isn't his real name, but he was there. He was an investment banker at Goldman Sachs Hong Kong, part of the team managing the Ant Group IPO. "I was on that deal for 18 months, he says. "We priced it. We allocated the shares. We wrote the prospectus. We had institutional investors lined up from New York to Singapore. It was perfect." At 11 p.m., my managing director called. His voice was flat. "It's dead. Tell the team to go home." We'd worked 100-hour weeks. Our fees gone. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was calling our clients the next morning, explaining why we didn't see this coming. He pauses. "We knew the regulatory environment was tightening. We knew Ma's speech was provocative, but we convinced ourselves it wouldn't matter. The deal was too big. The momentum was unstoppable. We were wrong." And our clients, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, retail investors, they all wanted answers. Because the truth is, we should have seen this coming. All the signs were there. We just didn't want to look. November 4th, 2020, morning, Hong Kong Stock Exchange opens. Alibaba's stock plunges 8% in the first hour of trading. Market value erased, $76 billion in a single day. Jack Ma's net worth drops $12 billion overnight, on paper at least. In reality, the damage is far worse. American pension funds holding Alibaba stock watch their portfolios crater. CalPERS, the California Public Employees Retirement System. New York State Pension Fund, they all had exposure. Bloomberg's headline, "World's biggest IPO collapses at the last minute." Financial Times, China's regulatory risk comes into sharp focus. The question everyone is asking, was this about Jack Ma's speech or was it about genuine financial concerns? The official statement from Chinese regulators, protecting financial stability and investor interests. The unofficial truth, both. The speech gave them license to act on concerns they already had. Ma's arrogance made it politically possible to do what was economically necessary. But there's another question, a darker one. Where is Jack Ma? November 5th, 2020, Jack Ma cancels a scheduled appearance. November 10th, another cancellation. November 20th. He's supposed to judge the finale of Africa's Business Heroes, a reality show he created to find entrepreneurs across Africa. He doesn't show up. By December, Ma has disappeared completely from public view. He's not on social media. Previously, he was active on Weibo, China's Twitter. He's not attending events. He's not giving interviews. Speculation explodes. Has he been arrested? Is he under house arrest? Did he flee to Singapore? Some people whisper darker possibilities. Chinese social media censors delete any mention of Jack Ma missing. International media runs stories. Where is Jack Ma? The pattern is familiar to anyone who watches China closely. 2018, Fan Bingbing, China's most famous actress, disappeared for 3 months. She resurfaced with a $130 million tax penalty and a public apology. 2017, Xiao Jianhua, a billionaire financier, disappeared from a Hong Kong hotel. He's never been seen in public again. 2020, Ren Zhiqiang, a real estate tycoon who criticized Xi Jinping's handling of COVID-19, disappeared in March. In September, he was sentenced to 18 years in prison. The message to Chinese billionaires is clear: stay in line or disappear. Jack Ma has just learned that lesson. November through December 2020. While Jack Ma is out of sight, Chinese regulators are conducting a forensic audit of Ant Group's operations. They pull internal documents, transaction data, lending algorithms, risk models, every piece of the empire that Ma built. What emerges is a financial empire built on regulatory arbitrage, finding gaps in the rules and exploiting them until the rules changed. Finding number 1, the lending scheme. Huobi and Jibei, Ant's consumer lending platforms, originate loans, but Ant only holds 2% on its own balance sheet. The other 98% is sold to partner banks, small regional banks, not major institutions. If borrowers default, those banks absorb the losses. Ant keeps the origination fees, risk transfer disguised as innovation. The data shows 500 million borrowers. Many of them have multiple loans. Someone borrows from Ant, then from Tencent's WeChat Pay, then from peer-to-peer lending platforms. Each lender only sees their piece. No one sees the total debt load. This is what caused the 2008 financial crisis in America. Hidden leverage, interconnected risk. Official default rates are reported at 1.5%. Regulators estimate the real number is closer to 2 or 3%. At $370 billion in outstanding loans, even 2% means $7.4 billion in potential losses. Can regional banks absorb that? What if there's an economic downturn? What if unemployment rises? What if the housing market cracks? The systemic risk is real. Finding number 2, the monopoly. Alipay's market share is 55%. Tencent's WeChat Pay has 38%. Together, they control 93% of China's mobile payment market. But the investigation reveals something deeper. Exclusive agreements with merchants. Use Alipay exclusively or face higher fees. Use Alipay or risk being delisted from our platforms. Taxi apps, food delivery services, e-commerce sites. Alipay is embedded everywhere. Consumers use Alipay because merchants require it. Merchants use Alipay because consumers have it. Network effects create unbreakable dominance. Imagine if Amazon only accepted PayPal and Walmart only accepted Venmo. That's the kind of lock-in Ant has created. Regulators conclude this is anti-competitive behavior. It violates China's antitrust laws. Finding number 3, the data empire. Ant's credit scoring algorithm, Zima Credit, also called Sesame Credit, analyzes over 1 billion users. Data inputs include purchase history, payment behavior, social connections, geolocation patterns. The algorithm knows where you shop, what you buy, who you know, where you go. Your score determines whether you get a loan, whether you can rent an apartment, whether you're a good match on a dating app. But citizens don't know what data is being collected. They don't know how scores are calculated. They can't appeal if their score is wrong. And this is the national security concern that terrifies Beijing. A private company controls the financial profiles of China's population. If Ant's servers are hacked, if the data is stolen, if it falls into the hands of foreign governments, the implications are catastrophic. This isn't theoretical, this is existential. April 2021, 5 months after the IPO collapsed, Chinese regulators issue their mandate. Ant Group must restructure. It must become a financial holding company, subject to the same regulations as traditional banks. 4 mandates. Mandate 1, increase capital reserves, from 2% to over 30% for loan portfolios. This means Ant must hold $111 billion in capital versus $7.4 billion previously. Lending capacity slashed by 75% or more. Profit margins collapse. Mandate 2, break the monopoly. Alipay must interoperate with competing payment platforms. End the exclusive merchant agreements. Let consumers choose their payment methods freely. Market share erosion is inevitable. Mandate 3, share the data. Credit scoring data must be contributed to a state-backed credit bureau. End proprietary control over user financial data. Ant's competitive advantage, its data, is nationalized. Mandate 4, change governance. Reduce Jack Ma's voting control. Add state-aligned board members to the company. Government veto power over major strategic decisions. Ant Group is no longer independent. The deadline, December 2022, later extended to 2023, but the message is clear: comply or be dismantled. The impact on valuation is devastating. October 2020, Ant Group was valued at $310 billion. By 2021, post-restructuring estimates put it at $64 to $78 billion. $246 billion erased, not by competition, not by market forces, by regulatory fiat. To put that in perspective, $246 billion is larger than the entire GDP of Finland. It's equivalent to the combined market value of Nike, Starbucks, and Netflix. Gone in 6 months. January 20th, 2021, 78 days after the IPO collapsed, Jack Ma resurfaces. A 50-second video appears online. The setting is a classroom. Ma is speaking to a small group of rural teachers, his former profession before he became a billionaire. He talks about education, about philanthropy, about giving back. There's no mention of Ant Group, no mention of Alibaba, no mention of business at all. His body language is subdued. He's reading from notes. His voice lacks the charisma and defiance that defined him for 20 years. Analysts watching the video use the same word, hostage. This is a hostage video, one China expert tells Bloomberg. He's signaling that he's been re-educated. Re-education, it's a Communist Party term, ideological correction. You disappear, you learn your place, you come back changed. Over the next year, Ma makes occasional public appearances, playing golf, visiting rural schools, always low profile, always non-commercial, always staying far away from anything that might look like power. In 2022, he's spotted in Europe, Spain, the Netherlands, a signal that he's allowed to travel but not to return to business. January 2023, Jack Ma formally cedes voting control of Ant Group. He no longer appears on Alibaba's partner list. His net worth is still around $25 billion, but his influence is gone. The transformation is complete, from China's most celebrated entrepreneur to a cautionary tale. The message is sent, the message is received. Ant Group today is a shadow of what it was. July 2023, Ant is fined $984 million for violations, illegal fundraising, improper lending practices, monopolistic behavior, data privacy violations. The fine is symbolic. The real punishment was the restructuring. December 2023, Chinese regulators declare the restructuring basically complete. Ant today, smaller, compliant, marginalized. Valuation estimates in 2024 $64 to $78 billion, an 80% drop from its peak. Lending volume is down 60% due to capital requirements. Market share is eroding, WeChat Pay is gaining ground. Profitability is down more than 40% due to compliance costs. Employees face mass layoffs, bonuses slashed, morale destroyed. One former employee, speaking anonymously, "We went from thinking we'd change the world to just hoping we'd keep our jobs." But Ant Group was just the beginning. December 2020, regulators launch an antitrust investigation into Alibaba. April 2021, Alibaba is fined a record $2.8 billion for monopolistic practices. July 2021, Didi, China's version of Uber, goes public on the New York Stock Exchange. 2 days later, Chinese regulators ban the Didi app from app stores. The company is forced to delist and return to China. The education technology sector is decimated overnight. Companies like TAL Education and New Oriental lose more than 90% of their value when new regulations effectively ban for-profit tutoring. Gaming companies face new restrictions. Tencent's revenue takes a hit when minors are limited to just 3 hours of gaming per week. The total market value erased from Chinese tech stocks in 2021, $1.5 trillion. $1.5 trillion. And who lost money? American investors. CalPERS, the California Public Pension Fund, lost an estimated $4 billion on Chinese tech exposure. Vanguard, BlackRock, Fidelity, index funds holding Chinese stocks, billions in losses. Retail investors on Robinhood who bought Chinese ADRs, wiped out. The lesson: regulatory risk in authoritarian states cannot be priced. Because the rules don't change through legislation or court decisions. They change through phone calls. In Silicon Valley, tech founders watch nervously. Private conversations, "Thank God we're not in China." But publicly they're cautious, diplomatic. Because they're also wondering, could this happen here? Could the Biden administration's DOJ do this to Meta, to Amazon, to Google? The answer is complicated, but the question has been asked. So what does this mean? Lesson 1, innovation versus control. China made a choice. They chose stability over disruption. They chose control over chaos. The Western model, at least historically, has been to let companies grow, then regulate after problems emerge. America did this with railroads, with oil, with banks. The 2008 financial crisis was the price of underregulation. China's model is different. Prevent problems by controlling growth from the start. Don't let companies get so big they threaten the system. The question is, can you have innovation without risk? Can you have disruption with state approval? The early verdict isn't encouraging. Chinese tech sector investment is down 50% since 2021. Entrepreneurs are self-censoring, avoiding sectors that might threaten state power. Finance, media, education. Talented engineers and founders are leaving, moving to Singapore, to the United States, to Europe. The counter-argument, maybe China is preventing its own 2008 crisis. Maybe 20 years from now, historians will say they made the right choice. The test is still running. Lesson 2, no one is too big. In democracies, billionaires have legal protections. They have political influence. They own media platforms. They can fight back. In China, wealth is permitted, but power belongs to the party. Jack Ma learned this. So did Alibaba. So did Tencent, Didi, Meituan, every tech giant that thought they were building something independent. The pattern is consistent. Grow big, get confident, challenge authority, get humbled. For Chinese entrepreneurs today, there's a ceiling. You can be successful, you can be rich, but you cannot be powerful. And the ceiling is wherever the party decides it is, whenever they decide it. Long-term planning becomes impossible when regulatory risk is existential. Lesson 3, the global investor reckoning. From 2010 to 2020, China was the growth story. Double-digit GDP, exploding middle class, hundreds of millions lifted out of poverty. Wall Street poured money in. Chinese stocks, bonds, venture capital. The assumption was simple. They need foreign capital, so they won't hurt foreign investors. The anti-IPO collapse shattered that assumption. Since 2021, there's been an exodus. Foreign direct investment in China is down 30%. IPOs are shifting from Hong Kong to Singapore. American pension funds are reducing China exposure. The regulatory risk is simply too high. Here's the question Americans should ask. Is my 401k invested in Chinese stocks? The answer is probably yes. Through index funds, through emerging market funds, through mutual funds that track global equities. And the risk? Regulatory actions you cannot predict or prevent. Decisions made in closed-door meetings in Beijing that can erase billions in market value overnight. The geopolitical dimension makes this worse. US-China decoupling is accelerating. America bans Huawei equipment. China retaliates by restricting American semiconductors. The technology Cold War is fracturing global supply chains. Capital markets are fragmenting too. China's financial system versus the West's. Two parallel universes that are slowly pulling apart. This raises a bigger question. Are we witnessing the end of globalized capital markets? And here's the ultimate irony. Ant Group pioneered fintech innovations that have been copied worldwide. Buy now, pay later services, QR code payments, embedded finance, super apps that combine payments, lending, and commerce. The model succeeded everywhere, just not where it was invented. November 3rd, 2020, 11:47 p.m. Jack Ma's phone rings. In 37 hours, the world's biggest IPO dies. $310 billion becomes $64 billion. $246 billion erased, not by markets, not by competition, not by consumer choice, by mandate. Jack Ma thought he was too big to fail. He thought his success made him untouchable. He thought China needed him more than he needed China. He learned what every Chinese billionaire eventually learns. Nobody is too big to disappear. His mistake wasn't building Ant Group. It wasn't revolutionizing payments or democratizing credit or creating a financial empire that processed more transactions than Visa and MasterCard combined. His mistake was forgetting who really controls China. He forgot that in an authoritarian state, economic power is always subordinate to political power. That innovation is permitted until it threatens control. That entrepreneurs can build empires, but they can never build kingdoms. One speech, 20 minutes on a stage in Shanghai. Words that criticized old men in dark suits who held his fate in their hands. One phone call, 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night. A voice that was calm, professional, and final. One lesson, the most expensive lesson in modern business history. In China, the party always has the final word. The IPO that never was didn't just define an era, it ended one. Jack Ma was the face of Chinese entrepreneurship for 2 decades, a symbol of what was possible when talent and ambition met opportunity. Proof that in China's new economy, anyone could rise. But symbols can be torn down, icons can be humbled, and entrepreneurs, no matter how successful, exist at the pleasure of the state. Today, Jack Ma is still a billionaire. He still travels, he still appears in public occasionally, but he's no longer the man who stood on the New York Stock Exchange in a Tai Chi outfit, grinning at the cameras. He's a warning to every entrepreneur in China who thinks they're special, to every tech founder who believes they've built something too valuable to touch, to every billionaire who forgets that in an authoritarian system there are no untouchables. Ant Group still exists. It's smaller, regulated, compliant. It processes payments and issues loans and manages wealth, all under the watchful eye of regulators who can shut it down with a phone call. The employees who thought they'd change the world are gone. The investors who thought they'd get rich are gone. The dream of going public, the dream that was supposed to make history, is gone. What remains is a lesson, a case study, a cautionary tale told in business schools and boardrooms around the world. And for investors, entrepreneurs, and governments watching from every corner of the globe, the Ant Group story poses one final question. One that keeps finance ministers awake at night. One that makes venture capitalists reconsider their China strategies. One that reminds us that in the 21st century, the biggest risk isn't market risk or credit risk or even technological disruption. It's political risk, the risk that the rules will change, that power will be exercised, that a phone call at midnight can destroy what took decades to build. Jack Ma learned this on November 3rd, 2020. The question isn't whether this could happen again. The question is, where will it happen next?